Biafra War, 10,000 people were dying every single day. Not from bullets, not from bombs, from starvation. And 6,000 of them were children. But here is the part most people do not fully realize. This was not simply an accident of war. A Nigerian federal official once said openly, and I quote, "A starvation is a legitimate weapon of warfare." This is not a story about who won the war or who lost it. This is a story about the people trapped between two armies and the children who never got the chance to grow up. How starvation became a mustn't. To understand what happened inside Biafra, you first have to understand one word: blockade. When Biafra declared independence in May 1967, the Nigerian government faced a difficult problem. Biafra still had soldiers, territory, weapons, and people willing to fight. But there was one thing Biafra could not survive without: food. And the federal government understood this very quickly. Within months, Biafra was surrounded. Roads were blocked. Ports were shut down. Land access disappeared. The only remaining route into Biafra was through the sky. Officially, the blockade was described as military strategy, cut supply lines, weaken resistance, forced surrender. But in reality, the people who suffered most were not soldiers. They were civilians, mothers carrying hungry children, elderly people fleeing violence, families already displaced by the killings of 1966. And slowly, the blockade transformed hunger into a weapon. The hunger bisons by 1968, conditions inside Biafra had become catastrophic. Entire villages had emptied, farms were abandoned, markets disappeared. Refugee camps expanded across the region, and food became almost impossible to find. Relief organizations tried to help: the Red Cross, church groups, international charities. But supplies entering Biafra were heavily restricted. Nigeria insisted aid deliveries must pass through federal approval. Biafra did not trust the process. Aid shipments were delayed, reams were blocked. Inspections slowed everything down, and while governments argued, children starved. Inside medical camps, doctors began reporting a terrible condition: kwashiorkor, a severe form of protein starvation. Children's stomachs swelled unnaturally, hair changed color, skin cracked open. Their bodies slowly consumed themselves to survive, and many of them died quietly in their mother's arms. The word "Cease Biafra," then the photographs began to spread. Images of starving Biafran children appeared across newspapers and television screens around the world. For many people outside Africa, this was the first time they truly saw what starvation looked like. Not as statistics, not like politics, but as human beings. Tiny bodies, swollen bellies, eyes too weak to cry. The reaction was immediate. Churches raised money. Volunteers organized aid. Pilots risked their lives flying food into Biafra at night. The missions became known as the Isle of Life. Cargo planes landed in darkness with no lights, no radio guidance, and sometimes under threat of attack. But here is the painful irony. While the world tried to feed Biafra, the Nigerian government tried to stop many of the flights. Officials feared food planes could also carry weapons, and from a military perspective, they considered that risk unacceptable, even if civilians died because of it. On paper, it was security. But inside Biafra, it felt like abandonment. 10,000 a day by 1969. The scale of suffering had become almost impossible to comprehend. At the height of the crisis, an estimated 10,000 people died from starvation every single day. 6,000 of them were children, every day. For months, relief workers entering Biafra described scenes they never forgot. Children are too weak to stand. Mothers unable to produce milk because their own bodies were starving. The entire camp was silent from exhaustion. One photograph became especially famous. A young mother trying to breastfeed her baby. Both of them are skeletal. Both are staring directly into the camera. The image traveled across the world. It shocked millions of people. But it did not stop the war. Because governments debated politics. Why ordinary people buried their children. And slowly, starvation became normal. Food became rare. Movement became dangerous. Fear became daily life. They were NDS. But the silence begins on January 15, 1970. Biafra surrendered. The war officially ended. Nigeria declared itself united again. General Yakubu Gowon announced a policy of reconciliation. No victor, no vanquished. Those were the words. But many survivors would later ask a difficult question. If there was no victor and no vanquished, why did so many people feel forgotten? Because after the war, there was no official reckoning, no war crimes tribunal, no investigation into starvation policies, no national memorial for the children who died. The officials connected to the blockade were never prosecuted. Families who lost children received no compensation, and many survivors simply carried their grief in silence for decades. Because when a country chooses silence over remembrance, pain does not disappear. It simply becomes invisible. The Haimak asked what happens to a country after millions die. What happens to the mothers who buried children they could not feed? What happens to communities forced to continue living as if nothing happened? The Biafra War killed between 1 and 3 million people. Most were civilians. Most never carried weapons. Many were already fleeing violence before the war even began. They escaped killings in northern Nigeria, only to become trapped in a territory slowly cut off from food. And inside that territory, children became the first casualties. This was not only a war about land, it became a war about survival itself. And the survivors carried those memories long after the shooting stopped. Grandparents never returned, families disappeared. Entire generations grew up with silence where stories should have been. Because war does not end when peace is declared. War continues inside memory, inside grief, inside the things people are too afraid to discuss. Was the starvation of Biafra simply an unavoidable tragedy of war? Or was it a deliberate strategy that went too far? That question still divides people today. The blockade was officially described as military policy, but when thousands of children die every day and leaders know it is happening, the line between strategy and suffering becomes impossible to ignore. And maybe that is why the Biafra War still feels unfinished in the minds of many Nigerians, because silence does not erase pain, it only hides it. If this video opened your eyes to a part of history rarely discussed, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone else. And tell me in the comments, do you believe the starvation was a consequence of war or a choice made during war? Because until that question is fully answered, the memories of Biafra will continue to live on.